She thought she was marrying the love of her life, but little did she know that beneath his charming facade lay a web of lies that would lead to her untimely death. This is the tragic story of Lori Hacking, a woman betrayed by the person she trusted the most. Lori K. Soares was born on December 31st, 1976 in California, but grew up in Orem, Utah. From an early age, Lori was known for her vibrant personality and her ability to make friends wherever she went. Her smile could light up any room, and her kindness was a trait everyone around her cherished. As the youngest of 3 children, her family meant the world to her. Lori was a woman full of life and ambition. After high school, she attended Brigham Young University, where she pursued a degree in business. During this time, she met Mark Hacking, a fellow student who quickly became the center of her world. Mark, like Lori, was raised in a devout Mormon family, and their shared faith and values created an instant bond between them. Mark was charismatic, outgoing, and seemed to have a bright future ahead of him, just like Lori. Their relationship blossomed quickly, and it wasn't long before they were deeply in love. Friends and family admired the couple, often describing them as perfect for each other. Lori's parents were particularly fond of Mark, appreciating his charm and the way he treated their daughter. They saw in him the ideal son-in-law, a man who would love and protect Lori for the rest of her life. In 1999, Mark and Lori married in the Salt Lake Temple, a sacred place for members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It was a joyous occasion filled with hope and promise. The couple began their married life in Salt Lake City, where Lori worked in the finance department at Wells Fargo, and Mark claimed to be pursuing a degree in psychology at the University of Utah. Lori was excited about their future together. Mark often talked about his plans to become a doctor, and they both looked forward to the day when they would move to North Carolina, where Mark had supposedly been accepted into medical school. Lori envisioned a life filled with adventure, success, and eventually, a family of their own. She supported Mark in every way, proud of the man she had married and eager to share in the life they were building together. However, beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect life, cracks were beginning to form. Cracks that Lori, in her love and trust, couldn't see. Mark's charm was masking a much darker reality, one built on a foundation of lies that would eventually come crashing down, taking everything Lori held dear with it. As the years passed, Mark Hacking's web of lies grew more intricate, and the pressure to maintain his facade began to take its toll. For Mark, every day became a balancing act, trying to keep his fictional life intact while hiding the truth from Lori and everyone else around him. His lies were no longer just small deceptions. They had become the very foundation of his existence, and the stakes were higher than ever. By 2004, Mark had told Lori and their families that he had graduated from the University of Utah and had been accepted into the medical school at the University of North Carolina. The couple was preparing for a major life change, planning to move across the country so Mark could pursue his dream of becoming a doctor. Lori, ever the supportive wife, was thrilled at the prospect. She started making plans for their new life in North Carolina, imagining the possibilities that awaited them. But behind the scenes, Mark was living a lie so massive that it was bound to collapse. He hadn't graduated from college. In fact, he had dropped out years earlier. There was no acceptance letter from a medical school, no future as a doctor. Every aspect of his academic and professional life was a fabrication. And yet, Mark continued to deceive everyone around him, playing the role of the dedicated student on the brink of a promising career. The strain of maintaining this double life began to show. Mark grew increasingly anxious and paranoid, fearing that his lies would be exposed at any moment. He knew that if Lori or anyone else discovered the truth, his entire world would come crashing down. Instead of coming clean, Mark dug himself deeper into the deception, making up more lies to cover his tracks. Lori, completely unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface, continued to support Mark in every way she could. She worked long hours at her job, saving money for their move, and helping Mark prepare for what she believed was the next chapter of their lives. Her love for Mark was unwavering, and she trusted him completely. The thought that he could be lying to her never crossed her mind. However, the house of cards that Mark had built was beginning to wobble. In July 2004, just weeks before they were supposed to move to North Carolina, Lori made a discovery that would change everything. She learned that Mark had not been truthful about his acceptance into medical school. The details of how she found out remain unclear, but what is certain is that Lori confronted Mark about the lies he had been telling. This confrontation marked the beginning of the end. Mark's carefully constructed facade began to crumble, and with it, his grip on reality. He knew that Lori now held the key to his downfall, and in his mind, there was only one way to prevent the truth from coming out. The morning of July 19, 2004 began like any other for Lori Hacking. She woke up early, as was her routine, and prepared for a jog in Memory Grove, a park near their apartment in Salt Lake City. It was something she enjoyed. Running gave her time to think and clear her mind. But this morning was different. Unbeknownst to Lori, it would be her last. The confrontation with Mark had left Lori shaken. She had discovered that the man she loved, the man she had built her life with, had been deceiving her about something as significant as his education and their future. Lori needed time to process this, to figure out what to do next. But before she could make any decisions, Mark made one of his own, one that would forever alter both of their lives. As Lori went for her morning run, Mark stayed behind in their apartment. His mind raced with thoughts of what would happen if Lori told anyone about the lies. He couldn't let that happen. The fear of his secrets being exposed, the shame he would face, and the life he had fabricated coming undone, these thoughts consumed him. In his panic, Mark made a horrifying decision. He would silence Lori to protect his web of lies. When Lori returned from her jog, she was likely still processing the discovery she had made the night before, but she never had the chance to act on it. According to what Mark would later confess, he waited until Lori was asleep that night, then took a .22 caliber rifle and shot her in the head. The woman who had trusted him with her life, who had stood by his side through everything, was now gone, killed by the man she loved. After committing the unthinkable, Mark immediately went into damage control mode. He knew he needed to get rid of Lori's body and create a story that would deflect suspicion from him. He wrapped Lori's body in garbage bags, loaded her into the car, and drove to a dumpster behind a local church. There he disposed of her, hoping that she would never be found. But disposing of Lori's body was just the first step in Mark's plan to cover up his crime. The next morning, he called Lori's workplace to report her missing. He claimed that she had gone for a run and never returned, playing the role of the worried husband. Mark's story triggered a massive search effort that would involve hundreds of volunteers, law enforcement officers, and even national media coverage. As the search for Lori intensified, Mark maintained his facade, participating in news interviews and pleading for Lori's safe return. To the outside world, he was a grieving husband, desperate to find his missing wife. But behind closed doors, Mark was living a lie far darker than anyone could have imagined. For a time, it seemed that Mark's plan might work. The search for Lori yielded no immediate results, and Mark continued to manipulate those around him, playing the role of the devastated husband. But the cracks in his story began to show, and it wasn't long before investigators started to suspect that something was amiss. Mark had underestimated the determination of those who loved Lori. As the days passed and no trace of Lori was found, the focus of the investigation began to shift. The inconsistencies in Mark's story, combined with his strange behavior, led police to question whether Mark might be more involved in Lori's disappearance than he was letting on. As the days passed following Lori Hacking's disappearance, the search efforts intensified. Friends, family, and volunteers scoured the area, handing out flyers, combing through the nearby park, and making pleas for Lori's safe return. The story garnered widespread media attention, and soon the entire community was rallying behind the Hacking family, hoping for a miracle. But behind the scenes, law enforcement was beginning to view the case in a different light. From the outset, something about Mark Hacking's story didn't sit right with the investigators. While he played the role of the distraught husband flawlessly in public, his behavior in private raised red flags. Investigators noted that Mark seemed oddly composed for someone whose wife had just vanished without a trace. There were also inconsistencies in his timeline and details that simply didn't add up. One of the first things that drew suspicion was the lack of any significant evidence pointing to Lori's whereabouts. Despite the extensive search, there were no signs of struggle, no witnesses who had seen Lori after she left for her jog, and no clues that could indicate what had happened to her. This was unusual in a missing persons case, especially one that involves someone as visible in the community as Lori. Investigators decided to dig deeper into Mark's background, hoping to uncover anything that might explain Lori's sudden disappearance. What they found was a trail of lies that shocked even the most seasoned detectives. The man who had presented himself as a devoted husband and aspiring doctor was, in fact, living a double life. Mark Hacking had lied about his academic achievements, his career prospects, and even his daily activities. He hadn't graduated from the University of Utah as he had claimed, nor had he been accepted into any medical school. In fact, Mark hadn't even been attending classes for years. Instead, he had been spending his days playing video games and trying to maintain the elaborate facade he had created. The investigators also learned that Lori had recently discovered Mark's deceit. This revelation cast a new light on her disappearance. Could it be that Lori, upon learning the truth, had confronted Mark, leading to a fatal altercation? The more the detectives dug into Mark's life, the more convinced they became that he was hiding something something much darker than they had initially suspected. As the investigation continued, Mark's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He checked himself into a mental health facility, claiming he was experiencing a breakdown due to the stress of Lori's disappearance. While this might have been a ploy to avoid further questioning, it only served to heighten the investigators' suspicions. They began to see Mark not as a grieving husband, but as the prime suspect in his wife's disappearance. The turning point in the investigation came when Mark's brothers approached the police with a shocking confession. Mark had allegedly admitted to them that he had killed Lori and disposed of her body in a dumpster. This revelation was the breakthrough the police needed. Armed with this new information, they intensified their search, focusing on the landfill where Lori's body was believed to have been taken. Mark's admission to his brothers was a crucial piece of the puzzle, but it was still not enough to bring charges against him. The investigators needed concrete evidence, something that would definitively link Mark to Lori's death. As they combed through the landfill, the enormity of the task became clear. Finding Lori's remains amid the tons of waste would be like finding a needle in a haystack, but the search continued, driven by the hope of bringing Lori's family the closure they so desperately needed. As the days turned into weeks, the pressure on Mark increased. The walls were closing in, and it was only a matter of time before the truth would come out. Mark's carefully constructed life, built on a foundation of lies, was crumbling around him, and soon there would be nowhere left to hide. As the search for Lori Hacking continued, the community remained hopeful that she might still be found alive. But behind the scenes, law enforcement was closing in on the truth. The revelation from Mark's brothers that he had confessed to killing Lori was a pivotal moment in the investigation, but it left detectives with one crucial challenge. They needed a full confession from Mark himself. With mounting evidence and pressure, Mark's psychological state began to deteriorate further. His once calm demeanor cracked under the weight of his guilt and the constant scrutiny from investigators and the public. The mental health facility where Mark had checked himself in became a place where police could finally confront him with the reality of the situation. In early August 2004, after weeks of relentless investigation and questioning, Mark Hacking finally confessed to the murder of his wife, Lori. The details of his confession were chilling and revealed a man who had been pushed to the brink by his own lies. Mark admitted that on the night of July 18, 2004, after Lori had discovered his deception about medical school, he waited until she fell asleep. Overcome by the fear of losing everything he had built on lies, Mark took a .22 caliber rifle and shot Lori in the head as she lay in bed, unaware of the danger she was in. After killing Lori, Mark calmly set about covering up his crime. He wrapped her body in garbage bags and loaded it into his car. In the early hours of the morning, he drove to a local church and disposed of her body in a dumpster. Mark's actions were methodical and calculated, driven by the desperate need to hide the truth. But no amount of planning could erase the fact that he had murdered his wife, and now he was finally forced to confront what he had done. Mark's confession sent shockwaves through the community. The story of Lori's disappearance had captured the hearts of many, and the revelation that her own husband had killed her was almost too much to bear. For Lori's family, the confession brought a mixture of emotions, grief, anger, and a deep sense of betrayal. They had trusted Mark, welcomed him into their family, and now they had to grapple with the fact that he was responsible for taking Lori's life. The confession also marked a turning point in the investigation. With Mark's admission, the search for Lori's body became even more urgent. Police redirected their efforts to the landfill where Mark had disposed of her remains, determined to recover her body and bring her home to her family. The search was grueling and painstaking, with officers combing through tons of garbage in the sweltering summer heat, but they were driven by the need to give Lori the dignity and death that had been so cruelly denied to her in life. Despite the challenges, the search finally yielded results. On October 1, 2004, after more than 2 months of sifting through the landfill, investigators discovered human remains that were later identified as Lori Hacking. The discovery brought a bittersweet sense of closure to her family and the community. While nothing could undo the tragedy, finding Lori's body allowed her loved ones to say their final goodbyes and lay her to rest. Mark's confession and the recovery of Lori's remains solidified the case against him. The evidence was overwhelming, and there was no longer any doubt about what had happened on that fateful night. Mark Hacking had committed a brutal and senseless act, driven by fear and desperation, and now he would have to face the consequences. With Mark Hacking's confession and the discovery of Lori's remains, the case against him was airtight. The time had come for Mark to face the legal consequences of his actions. The community that had once supported him now watched as the man they thought they knew was brought to justice for the murder of his wife. In October 2004, Mark was formally charged with first-degree murder. The evidence against him was overwhelming. His confession, the physical evidence from the crime scene, and the discovery of Lori's body all pointed to his guilt. As the trial date approached, Mark's defense team faced an uphill battle. There was little they could do to mitigate the damning evidence that had been gathered. The trial itself became a media spectacle, drawing widespread attention from both local and national outlets. Reporters crowded the courthouse, and the public followed every development closely. For many, the trial was not just about seeking justice for Lori, but also about understanding how a man like Mark Hacking could commit such a heinous crime. The case had already captivated the nation, and now the courtroom would become the stage where the final act of this tragic story would play out. Mark Hacking initially pleaded not guilty to the charges, a move that shocked and angered many who had followed the case. However, the weight of the evidence and the prospect of a lengthy trial eventually led Mark to reconsider. In April 2005, in a move that spared Lori's family the pain of a drawn-out trial, Mark changed his plea to guilty. By pleading guilty, Mark accepted responsibility for Lori's death, but it did little to lessen the severity of his crime. The court proceedings continued, focusing on the sentencing phase, where the judge would determine the length of Mark's imprisonment. Given the gravity of the crime and the premeditated nature of the murder, the prosecution argued for the maximum sentence. During the sentencing hearing, Lori's family had the opportunity to address the court, expressing the depth of their loss and the impact of Mark's actions. Their statements were emotional and powerful, highlighting not only the pain of losing Lori, but also the betrayal they felt at the hands of someone they had trusted. They spoke of Lori's kindness, her dreams, and the future that had been stolen from her. It was a heart-wrenching reminder of the human cost of Mark's lies. Mark himself addressed the court, offering an apology for his actions, but for many his words rang hollow. The damage had been done, and no apology could ever bring Lori back. The focus now was on ensuring that Mark would be held accountable for the rest of his life. In June 2005, Mark Hacking was sentenced to 6 years to life in prison, the maximum sentence under Utah law at the time. The sentence reflected the severity of the crime, but for Lori's family, it was a small measure of justice in the face of an unimaginable tragedy. Mark would spend the rest of his life behind bars, a fitting end for a man whose lies had led to such devastating consequences. The trial and sentencing brought some closure to Lori's loved ones, but the emotional scars would remain. The community that had rallied behind the Hacking family now turned its attention to healing, remembering Lori for the vibrant and caring person she was, rather than the tragic victim of a senseless crime. As Mark began his prison sentence, the story of Lori Hacking's life and death continued to resonate with those who had followed the case. It served as a stark reminder of the dangers of deceit and the lengths to which some people will go to maintain a facade. But above all, it was a story about the fragility of trust and the devastating impact when that trust is shattered. In the months and years following the conclusion of the trial, the community of Salt Lake City struggled to come to terms with the loss of Lori Hacking and the shocking betrayal by her husband, Mark. The story had gripped not just the local community, but the entire nation, leaving a lasting impact on everyone who had followed the case. For Lori's family, the pain of her loss was compounded by the deep sense of betrayal they felt toward Mark. They had welcomed him into their lives, trusted him, and supported his relationship with Lori, only to have him take her life in the most brutal way imaginable. The emotional toll on her parents, siblings, and close friends was immense. They were left to pick up the pieces of their lives, carrying the burden of grief and loss with them every day. Lori's parents, in particular, found themselves grappling with an overwhelming sense of sorrow. They had lost their youngest daughter, a woman who was full of life and had so much more to give. In the wake of Lori's death, her parents became vocal advocates for domestic violence awareness, hoping to prevent others from experiencing the same tragedy. They spoke at events, shared Lori's story with others, and worked to raise awareness about the warning signs of domestic violence and the importance of trust and communication in relationships. The broader community also felt the impact of Lori's death. The people of Salt Lake City, many of whom had participated in the search efforts and followed the case closely, were left with a sense of collective grief. Lori's murder shattered the illusion of safety and trust that many had taken for granted. It was a stark reminder that even in the most seemingly perfect relationships, darkness can lurk beneath the surface. The media, too, played a significant role in shaping the public's perception of the case. News outlets continued to cover the story long after the trial had ended, with many focusing on the broader implications of the crime. Documentaries, podcasts, and true crime shows featured Lori's story, keeping her memory alive while also exploring the psychological and social factors that contributed to the tragedy. Lori's death also sparked conversations about the pressures and expectations placed on individuals in relationships. Mark's lies had been driven by a fear of failure, and a desire to live up to the expectations of those around him. His inability to confront his own shortcomings and his decision to deceive everyone around him ultimately led to the destruction of not just his life, but Lori's as well. The case served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of living a double life and the importance of honesty, both with oneself and with others. In the years that followed, Lori's family and friends continued to honor her memory. They established scholarships in her name, funded charitable causes that Lori had cared about, and kept her spirit alive through acts of kindness and generosity. For them, Lori's life was not defined by the way it ended, but by the love and joy she had brought to those around her. As for Mark Hacking, he remains in prison, serving his sentence for the murder of Lori. While justice has been served, the question of why he committed such a heinous act lingers. Was it the fear of being exposed as a fraud, the pressure of living up to unrealistic expectations, or was there something darker, something that no one saw coming? The story of Mark and Lori Hacking is one that will never be forgotten. It is a tale of love, lies, and betrayal, a tragic reminder of the fragility of trust and the devastating consequences when that trust is shattered. For those who knew Lori, the pain of her loss will never fully fade, but her memory lives on in the hearts of those who loved her. If you found this story compelling, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. And if you're interested in more stories that dive deep into the human psyche and the darker side of relationships, check out my other videos, each one as gripping and thought-provoking as this one. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below and share this video with someone who might find it as fascinating as you did. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.